Happy Friday, guys, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Dubs. I'm your host, Bill T. It's Friday, and you know what that means. It's time for another podcast, and I'm bringing it to you from around the world this time. Another podcast from the UK. I've been tracking people down, and if you guys had ever, as being the VW scene back in the early 90s and that little known magazine Volk's World came out, if some of you guys were lucky enough to get some subscriptions, I used to drive to a bookstore to go pick it up. You'd remember seeing the Bill-A-Bug that was built back in the day. Well, that was built by a company called Thump Thump, and Thump Thump was a couple guys out of England, and one of those guys, Townsend, is on the podcast today. He's got a long storied history of being in the VW scene, building some really unique stuff, and we really get down into what it takes building a car like that, where his motivation came from, and where he's pulling ideas from. He's always kind of marched to his own drum, so it's definitely a great podcast. It's a real story about real life and the perception of other people and what's really going on in life at the time. So it's a great podcast, and you get to know about the history of Townsend and the guy that put Thump Thump on the map, did the Targa bugs, did all kinds of wild and unique stuff in the early 90s, and definitely a good podcast. So, but don't forget to support our sponsors. That's VW Trends Magazine, a magazine for the people, by the people, new issue out now. So make sure you go subscribe at VWTrendsMagazine.com, as well as our buddies over at Ross Wolf. Just outfitted the turbo bug. The supercharged bug with some velocity stacks and a locking dipstick of Ross Wolf that I'll post up on my Instagram. And, they make some really cool stuff for your Volkswagen. So if you're looking to kind of dial it in, make it look cool, and buy some cool products that work really well, they've also just recently come out with their performance style heavy gauge spark plug wires that look like the early style cloth wrapped spark plug wire. So go check them out today at rosswolf.com. That's rosswolf.com. Well, I'm excited to get this podcast going, but a couple shout outs real quick. Shout out goes from G Bob said, love the show. I had a VW as my first car when I was 16, a 59 bug. Now at age 63, I wanted to find out more about the culture of bug lovers and become one myself. This is the perfect show to immerse yourself in this wonderful culture. I'm listening to all the shows one by one, enjoying so much of the information and personalities. Thank you so much for a wonderful show. Well, appreciate you for giving me a 5-star review there. And if you want a shout out on the podcast, make sure you go to Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star review, and don't forget to put your name in the review. So appreciate you for that. Also, Dave Lawlor sent me a message on my personal Instagram, said still loving the podcast, is in the UK. Was thinking some people we might have to have on there. So he gave me a list of a bunch of people, and he's really enjoyed listening to the podcast. So I wanted to give him a shout out for sure as well. And I asked for it and I got it. So Duncan Whitehead sends me an email. He says, Bill, firstly, I have to say I love the podcast and really enjoy listening. Earphones in and my workday flies by. I run a UK VW club in the Midlands. I got into these cars when I was 17 years old with two brothers, Tom and James Kettle. Tom was mentioned by Stefan Rossi on your podcast with Ace Performance. Tom and Stefan worked at a UK shop that's been going on for 40 plus years, Kingfisher Customs. Now Dave Fisher, who owns the shop, would be a great guest. Talks a little bit about him being a good guest, and definitely want to look forward to getting him on there. But I want to give a shout out to Duncan Whitehead of way back, Air Cooled. Thanks for listening to the podcast, and I appreciate you guys. I'll be seeing you guys when I'm up there for European Bug-In. So if any of you guys are going out to European Bug-In, I'll be there. So if you guys are wanting some gear and want me to bring it over, man, send me a message. Let me know what you want, and we'll bring some cool stuff over to hook you guys up with. So, but now it's time to get into our podcast. Let's do it. Townsend of Thump Thump on Let's Talk Dubs.
You probably don't know that there's a new Volkswagen out that doesn't look like a Volkswagen. It's got everything that people who like the bug like.
Okay, everybody. So on today's show, if any of you guys have been in the VW scene for a long time, you guys know that us guys in the States, man, we try to find every resource that we can to expand our Volkswagen knowledge, right? So back in the early 90s, I used to go to a place called Bookstar, and they had this magazine from the UK. It was called Volk's World. And I happened to go in there at the first issue of Volk's World, and then I would go there every month. It was my fix to get something different, so I could go to the VW meetups and tell people like, oh yeah, well here's what they're doing in the UK, and have a little edge up on everybody. And I remember one of the cars that I saw that was legendary, that still sticks out to this day, was the Billabug that was built. And you guys remember it was kind of a sky blue bug on smoothies, slammed. The B pillar and C pillar were cut out, and it was just wide open on the side. And the entire interior had matching Billabong fabric for the interior. And it was just legendary. And for your listening pleasure today, I have the builder of that bug on the podcast, Jay Townsend, out of the United Kingdom. So welcome to the podcast today, Jay Townsend. Jay, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
So we're going to get into your history because I'm interested to know like what turned the screws behind the guy that did something so completely different. But the way that we typically always start the podcast is, what's your VW story and how did you get into Volkswagens?
Okay, so I suppose how I got into cars was a friend of my brother's gave me a massive box of car magazines called Custom Car, which I went through from cover to cover as I did. I was too young to drive, but I used to love seeing the creations in there. And the VW thing didn't really get me going, I suppose, until I saw a feature by a journalist. He was a hot rod journalist, I believe, and he passed away recently, which is a terrible shame. I think his surname was Ganal, but I might be pronouncing it completely wrong.
Pat Ganal.
That was his name, Pat Ganal. Okay,
Yep.
So that was in 1979. He did a feature for quite a new magazine here called Hot Rod and Custom. It's a really, really good mag. And he wrote a feature for a section in the magazine called American Pie. So that was 1979. And even though all the pictures of the bugs, all cowlet bugs, they're all in black and white, but the starts and the story, something about it just really captivated me, really, really did. And so I went out and I bought a 1303S campaign model, which I kind of a bit embarrassed about now, but
the champagne.
Well, you call it champagne. We call it campaign.
Yeah. It's funny enough, they're becoming valuable nowadays. Like especially if you find an original champagne model that hasn't been altered with.
Okay, so this was gold with corduroy interior,
Yikes.
which was
Yeah.
So I set about kind of destroying that. At the time, I couldn't weld or paint or do anything really. So I had a job where I had every afternoon off. And there was a small body shop in the village where I lived. And I just went in there. So, do you need a hand doing stuff? I want to learn. And the guy was really nice. And he let me muck around in there doing stuff. And I used to work on the 1303. And because I've been reading all these custom car magazines, everything was about French and stuff. So we Frenched the front indicators, an aerial, the rear license plate, all things like that I've been reading about in magazines, just for me to learn, really, more than anything. And a friend of mine sprayed it. Remember, I took the padded dash off and recovered that. And he was running like T-bars. I'm sure I sent you a picture of it, actually.
Yeah.
So I had that for quite a while. Now, some of the history of this, when I actually purchased cars and sold them, that is a little bit hazy because it wasn't of major importance to me when I sold the car. It's not a very memorable date for me.
Right.
So that was my first one, really. And whilst I owned that, I took a trip in 1981 to California with my brother. So we flew into San Francisco and drove down the coast road to Los Angeles and down to San Diego. And from the get-go, he said, if we go, you're not going to drag me around all these car places. And I promised that I wouldn't, which obviously was a complete lie. So I went to Top Line. I went to Gene Berg. Gene Berg took me in the workshop and made me a shifter because they didn't sell a shifter for a right-hand drive car. And so he modified one he had, and I brought that back, and I brought back some cadrons in my hand luggage, which you can imagine going through the x-ray machine at the airport. Yeah. They wondered what the hell, and fitted all the parts onto the 1303. So that was kind of my first venture into Volkswagens, really.
And what was it like? I mean, like going to, because back then, I don't know how many magazines you'd get from the States, but going to the States and kind of seeing the car scene there, what was the experience like being from the UK and seeing what the car stuff? Like you just go to Gene Berg and they got double the Volkswagens you would see at any of your normal gatherings, right, in their shop. So what was that experience like, seeing what the American, like the whole American vibe was like?
Well, I thought I would have seen a lot more on the road than I did. Obviously, it was a lot, but here in the UK, there was a lot of Volkswagens on the road. Like now, you never see you just don't see them on the road. Air-cooled Volkswagens, you don't, unless there's a meeting on and you're going somewhere, you'll see loads. But generally, from day to day, you don't ever see them.
Right.
So, I don't know. I wasn't 100% looking out for cow lookers. And I think the thing that I found brilliant, I went to Pismo Beach and saw buggies and, sand paddle tires or whatever they call them, and sand rails, and that really blew me away because I'd never seen anything like that in the flesh, and that was amazing.
Yeah. No, there's I mean, it's definitely out here we're pretty spoiled. I've got the sand dunes, I've had sand cars and all that stuff, and everything's just a short drive to be able to go do your motorsports out in the middle of nowhere. And a lot of that, all the origins of that stuff really comes from off-roading and sand buggies and stuff like that, because you didn't need a radiator. So what do you take to the desert? A car with no radiator, and just run the heck out of it all day. So you go to the States in 81, check out the shops, and then how does that impact your hobby from that point, just seeing that kind of stuff?
Well, funny enough, the only book I bought out there was on Bajas. So.
Oh, really?
Nice. I don't know why I brought that back, but it was something about that really, really caught my imagination. From having that car, I suppose it did put me in touch with other people, because it was featured in Street Machine magazine in 1983, and I can't really remember anything slightly cow look being in any car magazines before that. So only like a tiny little half-page reader's ride thing. The magazine was run by Clive Houseman. And at the same time, I used to go to the Chelsea Cruise, where I met Ivan McCutcheon, who ended up being editor of Vauxworld for quite a few years. So I used to see him down in the Chelsea Cruise in London. And so date-wise, I guess it was around 83. And in the meantime, I bought a 1954 oval ragtop for £100, which then it's like $200 at the time, I suppose. And I actually bought it from a place called Oval in London. So I bought an oval in Oval, and I slowly started doing work on that. And I had some quite crazy ideas what I was going to do with it including a 12A rotary engine. I got an adapter kit from KEP. So I was going to run a rotary in it because I saw another article about the guy that put a rotary in one. It sounded really good.
Right. And now so you get this 54 oval window ragtop and you start right out of the gate thinking about doing stuff different. Now because being in the VW scene, there's really, it doesn't matter. I don't think when you get in the scene, there's just this line of like, what's cool and what's not. This is what everybody's doing and that's what everybody's not. And you definitely have kind of marched to your own drum. What has been the inspiration to like just go to even take a 54 oval ragtop and try to do a rotary swap on it? Like you know what I mean? Like, have you always just liked to push against the grain or what?
I don't. Well, it sounds a bit ridiculous because I'm not great with mechanics anyway. I've never taken a bug engine apart. I mean, it's to sound crazy to a lot of people. I've never taken a bug engine apart because my friend Jim runs Stateside Tuning, and he was just up the road and he built race engines. So I suppose primarily when I had Thump Thump, I never got involved in doing anything with engines because it was a waste of my time doing it, because I know he's had years of experience. Why would I waste my time doing it badly when I could give it to someone that was really, really good at what they did?
Sure.
He didn't do body work. I did. So it was a good relationship. He had race cars I painted and he built engines for me. I love modifying engines and making them look really strange. That floated my boat. By the actual mechanics, never been into large engines. 1200 single ports I think are actually brilliant, and I've never been interested in having anything particularly quick.
Yeah, the 1200, the stock VW motor is like the Ronco. It's like set it and forget it. You just drive it and it's always there. It always starts, no issues, they just run forever when they're bone stock. But some of us have an issue where we gotta try to do something a little more exciting. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, I mean, in the early days, all we had were stock motors, and you put an air cleaner on it, and you thought you were big time. So
that's it.
What ended up with the 54 oval ragtop?
Well, at the time, I had to pay someone to do the welding. I mean, I kind of gulp now at the things I did to it because it seems rather sacrilegious.
Right.
Because having a water-cooled engine gun, we panelled over the rear vents, changed the dash, changed so much on it. And, when I think about it now, I'd love that, the 54 oval ragtop.
Right.
But at the time, I completely mucked that one up. But, things happen for a reason, I suppose.
Now, so now you're into it as a hobby, right? And so this is around 86. So how do you make the leap from just like hobby to making this a profession? Like, what do you start getting into? You have a drive to get in the VW business, or, what?
So let me get the brain working. So I used to work for a company that sold body kits for cars.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all the fiberglass, like Cami, and all different body kits in a town close to where I lived. I was doing that, and I wasn't that happy doing that, so I thought I would do something on the side. So I started with my girlfriend at the time. We did come up with the idea. I did a few hand-painted T-shirts, which they sound very, very crafty, but they were like a stamp of a bug and then coloured in, and each one was kind of unique. And I met Brett Hawksby and Clive Watkins, who I can't remember how I met them now. And they must have seen the clothing somewhere. And I also was looking into selling Billabong surfwear. Yeah, I met one of the agents and I thought that'd be quite a good thing to do. And I met Brett and Cliff, and they told me about a Volkswagen show they were going to be doing up at Sandspod Raceway. And they bought some surfwear off me, and they said, why don't you come on and have a stand at the show? So fair enough, did that. And these hand-painted T-shirts, they're quite not very in fashion now, but at the time, in a weekend, we sold like £2,500 worth of, like $5,000 worth of T-shirts in one weekend. So it's like, that seemed quite a good idea.
Yeah.
And so I started buying more Billabong stuff. And at the time, there was no one doing clothing at Volkswagen shows. I mean, every year it would double, and it ended up to be more clothing people than anything else primarily. But at the time, there wasn't really a connection between clothing and Volkswagens at the shows. And so we got in there quite early with that. But my interest was primarily in the cars. So we used to run both side by side. So we used to take the cars to the show and have a stand with clothing on it. So we used to run both of them together, really.
Really? So, and then when you were doing that, was it through a company name, or you just set up at the swap meets?
Yeah, well, it used to be J86 Enterprises.
What was it called? J86?
J86, because I started it in 86. J86 Enterprises.
I like it.
So, while I was at the car shop, funny enough, I don't know if you know Keith Hume.
I do, yeah. He's been on the podcast.
Okay, Keith's been on that. So when I was running this store in Hoddesdon, one day this guy drove in, shirt, tie, and that, and he's, hi, my name's Keith Hume. I'm going to start this Volkswagen magazine called Volksworld. So this, I don't know why, he didn't live anywhere near where the store was, why he was passing, God knows why. But so I met Keith before he started the magazine, and consequently, he was a fantastic contact, Keith, and he was so enthusiastic about everything, and that's why I think the magazine did so well. He knew his stuff. He was a really good writer, and the enthusiasm, I think, showed definitely in the magazines that he launched.
Yeah. Now, so you actually had a storefront set up for J86, or was that a weekend thing?
No, that was only a weekend thing, and it was only from the first Bug Jam, really.
And and where are you working when he comes to see you?
I was working in the store that's selling the kits for cars, the body kits.
Yeah, the body kit. So you were still working. You're in the automotive industry, working in that place.
Yeah, we used to sell alloys and tires and hi-fi stuff, all different stuff.
Now,
but it wasn't really where I wanted to be, I've got to be honest.
Now, with the Billabong thing, right? Just getting into selling some of that stuff. Was the surf culture? Clearly, there's not a lot of big waves over there in the UK, are there?
No, not at all.
The beaches aren't known for having some sweet pipelines, but
no.
Was that? I mean, obviously it's the '80s and the surf culture is real huge in the US. Is it just as big there, or was Billabong a pretty big deal over there to get some of that stuff?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was only Billabong. I think I chose Billabong because I really liked their designs. Everything was fluoro. I mean, absolutely everything was fluoro there. From distributor caps to HTLEs to fan housings, everything was fluoro, and obviously Billabong's fluoro stuff was quite full on, which is why I liked it, I suppose.
Yeah. And then so after that comes up the first Bug Jam. What are you building at this time, or do you have a car at this time? Okay,
so now I can't remember. This must have been after I sold the 1303. I'm sure it must have been. I sold that to a friend of mine, Lee. He bought that. I bought a late model Bug, must have been a 72, really cheap, really, really cheap. And I saw a car by a guy called Rick Pearman, who lived in Southend. He was good friends with Richard King. I saw his car, it had blended wings, candy graphics on the side. And I met Rick, really nice guy, and Richard at the time. I can't remember how we met. It must have been at a show somewhere. So I become really good friends with Richard and Rick. And I liked what Rick had done with his car. And I'm not one for copying because that's, just a bit sad.
Right.
But I was influenced definitely by his car. So I think it was a 72. The 72, I welded the wings on, blended them in. I still couldn't paint then, so a friend of mine painted it. I'd lowered it by cutting and turning the front beam. It was 2 notches at the back, so it actually sat right on the floor. It was really, really low.
Yeah.
The ride wasn't fantastic, but it looked awesome.
Right.
I did solenoid door locks, shaved loads of stuff on it. I think that was running the 1200 single port as well. And I took that to the first Bug Jam. That was my ride there.
And then after that? So, and what color is this car?
It was a pure white, but it wasn't a white from any car manufacturer. I just went to the paint store and asked them to pull a white up, but don't, because when you pick a white, obviously loads of different colours go in to make the white, but I kind of didn't want that. I wanted it with no other tint put into that mix, so it was really, really bright. It was just a pure white off the colour scheme with nothing added to it. So it wasn't a Ford, it wasn't a Volkswagen or a Honda. It was just the white they had on the scheme, but with nothing blended into it at all.
And now at this time, are you painting your own cars at this time?
No. A friend of mine painted it.
So you're still kind of working on things as a hobby type, as just kind of hobby type thing on the side. And then after this, you kind of get into big boys toys after this.
Yes. So it's very hard to explain this.
Yeah. So how does big boys toys start?
Well, I used to hang around with Richard all the time. Down in Southend, I used to stay there. Right crack. Mm-hmm. And also in Southend was a guy called Steve Martin. I can't remember what his store was called. He was like at the other end of Southend, and it was called Volk Spares or something he had. Selling loads of parts. I didn't know him at all. I had no idea who he was. Only that Richard, because he was competition for German car company, wasn't very keen on him. And so I was hanging around with Richard all the time. And then one day, Richard said to me, well, he thought that I was basically giving this guy, Steve Martin, secrets about where he was buying his produce from the States.
Yeah.
Which is, Richard was a really good friend of mine, so I would never do anything like that. And I didn't know who this Steve Martin was, so the whole thing seemed quite bizarre to me. How would I know where you're buying your parts from? And why would I do anything like that? So we kind of fell out, which was very upsetting because I love the guy to bits.
Yeah. And
then at a show, this Steve Martin, who Richard didn't like for whatever reason, I didn't know him, so I had no view on the guy. He approached me about working for him and setting up this new store, and I thought, well, you've never done anything to me. I make my own opinion about whether I like you or not. He did seem quite shifty. So I set up Big Boys Toys. I named it, did all the advertising for it and all the marketing. And he was okay. Steve was quite good to me. But I wasn't there for very long at all because he maybe didn't have the funds behind him to run the business correctly, but people were ordering parts. I was the manager there. They were ordering parts and he was taking deposits from people and not ordering them. And that really didn't sit well with me. So if they came into the store and asked where their parts were, I would just say he hasn't ordered them and give them their deposit back because I'm not going to be part of someone else's lie.
Right.
So I wasn't going to put up with working for someone with those kind of ethics, really.
Right. No, makes sense.
And at the time, it's not all rose tinted glasses. I mean, this is real stuff. But at the time, Gary Constable had come back from the States and he used to pop into the store because he lived quite local to the Big Boys Toys. He popped in with all these tales about what he was doing in the States and he could paint this, paint that. And so I thought, okay, that sounds quite interesting. He can do that. I've had a little go at welding, a bit of practice at welding. And we used to chat, and we were quite good to set up a place. And then one day, a guy came in, young kid came in called Darren Bryant. Really funny, really funny guy. He came in, he said, oh, quite a wide boy. He was, I think he worked for the stock exchange. He'd had some job in the stock exchange, so he got paid quite good money. Mm-hmm. And he was saying, oh no, I'm trying to find someone to paint a car for me. And rather crazy. I said, well, okay, well, I might be able to do it.
Yeah.
Even though I couldn't paint, I said, I can do it for you.
Nice.
And so at the time, I'd just purchased an apartment. So I was just gone into a mortgage. I mean, by a matter of weeks, really. I needed Steve Martin to sign off the paperwork to say I was buying this flat and I was earning so much money to actually be able to purchase it.
Right.
So Darren came in and he said about having a car painted. And so I went out and I found a workshop and we took a deposit off Darren. And it was with that deposit we put down the first month's rent to start Thump Thump. So without Darren and Brian, there must have never been a Thump Thump, or not for quite a long time, really, because he was like the catalyst for it.
And where did you have a plan? Like, because to come up with a name like Thump Thump, I mean, you've got to have a plan. Like, I've got to start a business. Maybe I want to do this. I mean, where does the name Thump Thump come from?
I have no idea. I cannot even remember. That's the honest truth. I cannot remember why we called it Thump Thump.
I mean, it's
no idea.
It's quite a different name, you know, and I mean, different enough to that you remember. You know, everybody that heard of Thump Thump remembers Thump Thump because the first thing you think is like, what kind of name is Thump Thump, right? So,
yeah, I quite like naming things like Big Boys Toys. I didn't. I suppose at the time, all the stores had like German car companies. So you had all parts of German cars, Volk spares. All had Volks or some kind of connotation of Volks, and because I didn't only want to do cars, I wanted to do clothing as well. So I didn't want anything you could easily associate with a car. Yeah. So it had to be something everybody would remember. Sure. So I suppose we broke down. Right at the time, it must have come up with loads of different names, but that one. Stuck, really, I think.
And so you get this deposit to paint a guy's car. You use that for your down payment to rent a workshop and start. So basically, the car begat the business, right? If the guy needed a car painted, you said, we'll take it. We have a shop. It's called Thump Thump. Oh, oh, really? Yeah, that's it right there. Thump Thump. And where's it at? I'll tell you in a week.
It was a bit like that. Now, when I say workshop, you can't really compare to most probably, even seeing your garage with the ramps.
Yeah.
No, I thought you did the business. I mean, your garage is, God, must be about 5 times the size of our first workshop. It was 15 feet by 15 feet. It was tiny.
Yeah.
It didn't actually have. We didn't have a compressor, so my friend had the unit next door, which is how I found out about it. His name was Steve Ball, and in his workshop there was a massive compressor. It was like a big industrial thing. So we just teed off his airline and ran it next door, and we both used the same compressor because the tank on it was absolutely enormous. So we didn't even have a compressor. I had the cheapest, nastiest Clark MIG welder you've ever seen. So that's how we set up. We had nothing. I mean, we really had absolutely nothing. So what I can remember of the notch, it wasn't in bad shape. I think the pans were quite bad. I didn't touch those. He didn't want anything done with those. He just wanted it to look different. And so for me, and he had free hand, he said, do whatever you want. And bear in mind, this is their first car.
Wow.
He'd never seen anything we'd done before. So the trust was quite amazing, really, when you think about it.
And this is before all the wild cars that you built after that. So who knows how this thing could have gone. So the end result of this notch, what was it? Custom? Was it stock? Was it mild custom?
Yeah, it was custom. We'll have to flag up some pictures as I'm talking about it. You have to put some steels in. So I think it had a couple. I think it was already lowered. It had a louvered rear valance. So I took the door handles off. I de-seamed the roof. I radiused the top of the doors. Panelled the dash. The dash was all color coded, which was really nice.
Oh wow!
You have to look at the pictures, really. You have to look at the pictures.
And now did this car get featured in the magazine?
Yes, but before that, I'll tell you, this is quite funny. So we're working on a car. I can't remember how long it took. Say 6 weeks, whatever. The trim was really nice. I found it was like a lilac colour. So I found a really nice lilac wool colour. And we had the interior done to match the colour of the paint. So the day comes for Darren and Brian to come and pick it up. It was still running steel wheels, really nasty steel wheels. So I went to Steve Martin down at Big Boys Toys. And I said, can I borrow some wheels? And he had, I think they were made by Centra. They're basically like a flat wheel with slots cut into the face, into like a triangle, with a hidden centre gap. So he said, I've got 2. So, okay, he's got 2 of these wheels. Okay, let's borrow 2 wheels. So I had tyres fitted, put the 2 central wheels on one side of the car. So as he comes in the workshop, he sees, I was trying to convince him to buy alloys, but he said, and I haven't got the money at the moment. So I was trying to convince him, to set the car off, it needs alloys on it. So as he walks in the workshop to pick the car up, he's just jumping up and down. I've never seen anyone so excited.
Yeah.
And the alloys are on one side and the steels are on the other side. But to do a photo shoot on it, we still left 2 alloys on one side and steels on the other. So all the photographs you see of the car are only from the side of the car with the alloys on.
Nice.
They only had 2 alloys they could lend us for the shoot. So So Costco, that was. Oh, let me have a look. I have to look at my notes.
So
I sent you.
Did he end up buying 4 wheels to match?
Oh, he did. Yeah, he did. Yeah, he had stacks of money. Really.
You just had to motivate him by showing the car on the right wheels.
Yeah. No, once he saw how good it could look, and it was quite nice because he could look at the other side of the car and he could see the before and then he could see the after. So. Perfect.
Now that car, obviously for back then, especially being a notchback, that was probably way out of step from what everybody was doing. And did that car bring you guys some more business?
Yes. So from that feature, yeah, I'd say pretty much that's what started us off.
Yeah.
And that was really, again, thanks to Keith Hume did a really nice feature on it. He put all our contact details in there, and if you want to get stuff done. And so, yeah, pretty much from then on, we were always quite busy.
And then the next car that you guys build after the notchback.
Okay, so
and then,
I hadn't built my.
Well, and then on a side note, you painted that car. That's the first car that you painted.
No. So Gary painted the notch. Because Gary told me he was a really good painter.
Nice.
We'll speak more about that in a little while.
Yeah.
So at the time, I found. I can't remember what year car the Billabug was. 64, I think it was 64.
Yeah.
Found it very, very tatty. And on selling the clothing, I thought, I had an idea in my head. When I used to think about cars, I would know how I didn't really draw or anything. I would know how I wanted it, the colour. Several things I would know in my mind how I wanted it to look. So I had the idea of a car with a surf interior, thinking I hadn't seen anything like it. We've got this really good contact Billabong in Australia. I'll pitch an idea. I'll give him a call. I'll pitch an idea. I'm building the car. How about sending us some material?
Nice.
Okay, so waited a few weeks. They said that, yes, we'd love to do that. Okay, so then after maybe a month, we were doing bits and pieces on it. A month, it was a massive roll of Billabong wave material turned up from Australia. And I wanted to flip the ideas of rather than having really loud paint on the outside, I wanted it to be quite subdued because the whole thing was going to be about the interior. The interior was the key to this car. And we would take influences from the shapes of the waves and project that into different parts of the car via cutouts on the wheels, the rear air vents, to carry the story quite subtly in a way around the car. So that was the idea of Billabug, was to flip things around. Everyone was doing bright colours outside. I wanted it quite a plain, subdued blue. But when you look inside it, that's when you get blown away. Yeah,
no, it was definitely something that, even the look on the outside of the car with the shaved rain gutters, what gave you the idea to open the pillars up?
I must have seen that because I was buying hot VWs all the time. I'm sure there was several cars that had done that, without a doubt. I would have seen that somewhere. It was not something unique to what I wanted at all.
Right.
It was de-seamed, and I took the swage line out of the roof. And I must have seen that somewhere, even in a Rod magazine or something. I must have seen that somewhere else. That's a massive amount of work taking the swage line out on a bug, because it's the whole length of the roof running down through the deck lid.
Right.
It's a colossal job, absolutely colossal. And we will discuss that maybe I didn't do a very good job of it.
Right.
But, it was early days. I was learning. It's the first car, basically, I built for myself.
Right.
And actually built for myself. Is my first car. So, give me a break.
Yeah. But a lot of the things that were done to this particular car, I mean, it really was it was almost like a minimalist car, with when you shaved the pillars off and then you filled in, like, the lower rocker was filled in as well. Like, you built a channel to cover normally where the running board goes.
Yes, that was to visually make it look lower than it was. So all of the wings were lengthened and dropped down the same extent as the sill area. I'm not a massive fan of running boards, I've got to be honest, on bugs. They don't do much for me. So that's why they were taken off. I'm not a huge fan of running boards, especially the aftermarket ones you buy were at the time really terrible. So I didn't want to put those on there, and it's making it look lower than it really is. I suppose that was the idea.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely pulled off but there's a lot of different key elements to that car that just make it stand out, with, the B pillar and the front door window opened up, then the running board smoothed in, lengthened fenders. Now the bumper on the front is that a stock bumper on the front? Because it looks a little more flat than a curved blade.
So it was an NOS bumper, because at the time you could still buy primered NOS bumpers. Mm-hmm. And I didn't particularly like bumper bolts. And again, it's a hot rod thing. You weld a bracket on the back and everything mounts via the bracket on the back. So there's no bolts showing on the bumper. And then I used to have them re-chromed locally. And we used to sell those. Because they were really nice bumpers.
Right.
So yeah, it had loads of trick things on it, I suppose. And all the time, I quite early on in Thump Thump, I realised that you're so limited when you've got a workshop. Same with Spike. I was chatting with Spike the other day. I said, you're limited by the amount of hours you can work. Yeah, and I used to work long hours, really, because it was a new business, crazy amounts of hours. I used to go to work, go home, have food, go back. Might work to like midnight to get something in primer, so then the next day you could dry overnight, and then the next day you could get it in colour. And I quickly realised that, you are limited. Doesn't matter how many hours you work, you're limited by those amount of hours. So I quickly realised that I needed to make products, and it was no good making products that other people are making. They have to be unique products. So I think the first thing I remember selling were solenoid door kits. There was no one doing a solenoid door kit. People were making their own. Okay. Yeah. But I did a how-to feature for Volk's World, which again was a good source of income, because I should take the photographs, used to write the article, sell the product, and then it was an advert. The how-to feature was an advert, and then I used to get the sales from the how-to feature. So it was a win-win scenario, really. And from the solenoid door kits, we had a really good engineer close by. Mm-hmm. So in the end, I was doing adapters, hub drilling, really big at the time. People wanted to run Porsche alloys. I was doing Peugeot wheels. So a dividing head. So you could basically, as long as it was safe to drill another PCD in there without weakening it, he could do any stud pattern, that anyone wanted at the time. So used to do that. Used to do drop spindles. I had made Targa bumpers. Get onto that in a bit. But there was loads of things. I thought, well, I might as well make stuff, and that would bring in a bit more money than working on the cars all the time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a lot of the shops. I mean, you even look at like one of the big guys today in the States, Ring Brothers. I mean, they build, $1 million cars, and every time they build a car, they build a product from that car that they offer for resale to try to bring in some revenue. So you started piecing together the kits and some of those pieces, and then doing the drilled drums and rotors. Now, you actually made some steering wheels at one time too, right?
Yeah, I made some stainless steering wheels. That's quite far on into. We've jumped ahead a heck of a lot there.
Yeah, no problem. So when you started manufacturing,
let's backtrack. We're getting.
So when you started manufacturing stuff, what was some of the good sellers in the early days that made you think? Did you start leaning more into the manufacturing side than the car customizing, or?
We'd have to go back to when Billabug was finished. I think.
Yeah.
Let's go back in time.
Yeah, that's fine.
So I finished Billabug. We never had much money running the workshop. There's two of us. I was paying a mortgage on the apartment I bought, and so we were quite skint. So we sold Billabug, and I sold it in the middle of winter, which was kind of funny because it had no heaters or anything. And a young kid who knew nothing about cars, he just loved the way it looked. He bought it along with the jacket.
And what do you sell Billabug for at the time?
I have no idea.
You don't even
I have no idea.
You just knew the bills were due.
No, I've no idea how much money it went for. Not a lot, because we needed the money and we needed it quite quick. So
right.
That went. At the same time, these kind of cross over a bit. A guy come down the workshop in 1990 called Darren Jacobs, and I think he had a blue Cabriolet 1303 at the time, and he'd seen work in the magazines that we've been doing. And Darren is, again, really key, important. Like Darren Bryan was for the first car. Another person called Darren is quite strange. But Darren Jacobs, who's now a very, very close friend of mine, he had bought a 67 type one from a guy called Andy Barry. Now, Andy Barry's a really clever guy. He used to work with Richard King for quite a few years. So the car he bought already had not suicides, but it had hidden hinges, had foosh on it. And Darren bought this 67, and he said, I want you to do something different with it. What can you do? So after a few weeks thinking about it, I said, how about, I must have seen a Targa kit or something in the States that someone had done. I said, how about we Targa it? Okay. So it's a massive gamble for me. My welding had improved drastically.
Right.
Let's do a Targa top. And stupid enough, Darren said, okay.
And now you haven't done one. You haven't done one. And this is not a kit. Right. So
no, this is not a kit. I could have completely destroyed his car doing this. I mean, I really, really could have ruined the car. And that was always at my mind. If I cut this roof off and it doesn't go right, that could kind of shut me, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was a learning curve, and it took me 5 weeks just to do the roof. I always remember that. It took me 5 weeks to do the roof. and it came out pretty good.
And then
I think,
but the hardest part of doing the roof, like, I mean, first is cutting the roof, and then there's getting it to attach and reattach on a consistent basis and lining up and all that kind of stuff. I mean, what was the challenge on that? I mean, there's a couple different iterations you did where you did a part of the windshield piece and then part without behind, you know. How did you work out the whole mechanism aspect of it?
Okay, so Richard King had done a few roof modifications. He had a calm gear with a lift-off hardtop, which came out really well. He did that with Andy Barry, and he had also done a T-top for Brett Hawksby.
Right.
And I knew the T-top leaked something chronic. And I remember Brett said I think he had a 300-pound Hugo Boss jacket inside, which just turned to mold completely. This thing leaked something chronic. And I didn't want to make a roof that leaked. I really didn't. And I'm not being unfair to Richard, because to be fair, I mean, Richard is backtracking again. This is not good. Richard, when I was friends with him, he told me how to paint my first car, which was my 54 Oval. He kind of taught me over the phone how to do that through each thing. So I hands off to him. He was very good. He was very, very good, a helpful person at that time. So I'm not slagging off his work, because his work is amazing. So the fact we don't get on is a different thing, but I admire what he does and the fact that he makes tons of parts, which I think is amazing. So Richard had done various roof conversions, and I knew that the T-top he did leaked, and I didn't want that at all. I thought, if you're going to do it, it's got to be, especially living in the UK, it can't be leaking. I like finding solutions to problems. Mm-hmm. So obviously with the roof, I really didn't have the skills to make massive, like 911 Targa rubbers. I didn't have the skills to cast rubbers and things like that. That's kind of, I imagine you could do it now, mostly easier than you could then, or you could adapt something from a factory T-top or something like that. But at the time, I didn't know how to go about it. But I did find in the catalogue a rubber foam, which is a closed cell neoprene. So it looks like a sponge, but each pocket is closed on it. It doesn't absorb water like a sponge. So the way the roof on the Targa sealed is a strip of closed cell neoprene. So as you put the roof in, you did up the over centre latches, and it squeezed on the neoprene. So it was completely watertight. I mean, really, it worked absolutely amazing.
Nice.
And we used that for all 8 Targas. So really good stuff.
You built a total of 8 Targas, and each one varied a little bit. You try something different with each one, or what?
No, the first 6 were the same as the red one, and then after 6, I was getting a little bit bored. I wanted to build something more hot rod looking. Mm-hmm. I've seen quite a few rimless front screens, and I quite liked how they looked. And then I thought about another idea of doing the front end on it, because it was quite the front part of the Targa was the most complicated part to get right. And by changing to a rimless screen, how can I describe it over the phone? Where your windscreen rubber sits within the body normally, if you take that away and then put a little peak of metal, join it to the roof, you make your own metal U-shaped channel as such that goes over the screen.
Yeah, like a Safari channel, like a Safari window channel.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. And so it saved massive amount of work. I mean, the front end on it, the front part of the roof, it just saved so much welding and construction compared to it was a bit of a eureka moment in a way. It was a completely different look that some people really liked and some people didn't. But, you know, after doing so many, I wanted to try another option. So speed-wise, it was vastly quicker. And it had quite a different look to it. But, yeah, some people like the red one and some people like the rimless one. It's
And then the red car was actually featured in Hot VWs, right? As the cover car for Hot VWs?
Yes. Wait. A front cover car on Hot VWs. I can't tell you how pleased that made me.
Yeah.
Because I loved the magazine.
That was like the pinnacle, right?
And so that was quite amazing. Yeah.
And then that car, so Darren's 67 Targa, it took you 5 weeks on that roof, but then it ends up getting Europe's most beautiful VW in what is this? This is the first Volksworld show?
No, it was a Bug Jam.
Oh, a Bug Jam in 91.
Yeah, I've looked at my notes now because my brain isn't.
I'm on you. I got the notes here. So in 91, that's when it gets America's most beautiful VW. And how is the business at that time? Like Thump Thump is just going crazy with business, or is it still kind of hand to mouth type thing?
No. No, it was booked up like a year in advance at that point. It really it was only two of us at the time, so it didn't need a vast amount of work to keep two people busy.
Right.
You know, it's not a massive body shot of like 8 people working. It was just 2 guys.
And you didn't want to have anybody with you.
No, most probably not at the time.
Right.
I said the workshop wasn't big enough to have 3 people in it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because by the time you got a car in there and stripped all the parts out of it, there was no storage in there. So I used to obviously try to get people to take seats and trim and all stuff away with them.
So Thump Thump existed. Thump Thump existed the whole time in this 15 by 15 shop?
No.
Oh, so you had a little bit bigger shop later.
Yes. So yeah, this is so disjointed.
No. It's totally and completely making sense. Trust me when I tell you this. You're thinking too much. So now when you get this car in 1991, because I remember I had a guy tell me a story. A guy told me a story about you, and because I'd asked the internet for some people if they had questions and want to tell me a story about you, and so I remember I'm talking to this guy, and he had spent all summers, nights, and evenings and weekends building his Volkswagen for the first time he's going to get it to the show, and he actually told me it was the first Volksworld show, and he got it there, and it was a pretty big deal that he got into the show and all this stuff.
At the rec center, yeah.
And there he sees you, who at this time is the legend from Thump Thump and the guy who's building all these cutting edge cars, and he brings you over to his car and he says, this is my car, what do you think? And you said to this guy, well, it looks like you need to learn how to use a polisher and sand this car a little bit. And then this guy is then completely crushed. His world hero comes to see him for this. And I only envision in my head like Eminem when he just gets pushed back from the rap scene and he has to go back to the drawing board and just start over again and really hone his craft because his idol had told him his work was not up to snuff. And this guy that we're talking about is Andy Finch. And,
Yeah.
you know, talking to Andy, he told me, had you not said that to him, he maybe would have thought what he was doing was good enough. And he would have not really put the effort into perfecting his craft like he's done. And so he said he attributes a lot of that. I mean, as a lot of people see it on the surface, like just a real swift kick to the groin. You know, he looks at it from a tough love standpoint, you know, but he said, I think the word in the UK is gutted. He was gutted when his hero told him, yeah, you ought to learn how to cut and buff, maybe.
Well, yeah, I didn't know Andy, and
that makes it even more of a spectacular story that you didn't even know him.
Well, yeah, my sense of humor is you have to get used to it. I suppose.
Yeah. No, well,
I'm very rude to people I like, and people I don't like, I ignore, and they know within 10 seconds that I don't like them. So people I like, I do. So Andy had the pink gear.
Yeah.
And I did say to him, when are you going to learn to flatten polish?
Yeah. Now,
and we always laugh about it now. And I call it, you had a special finish then, I say, it's called Lumpy Bumpy Surface of the Moon.
So that was the finish he put on it. Instead of cut and buff, he did the lumpy bumpy surface of the moon finish. I like it.
Yeah, lumpy bumpy surface of the moon. And if you go into the toilets in Spike's workshop, you'll see a letter that I wrote a letter.
You know what?
Have you seen it?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think let me just make sure I'm quite certain I should have a photograph of that letter, because when I was in his shop, you know, I read that letter and I thought, man, this guy is rough, you know. And then let me see if the audience would just spare us just for a minute so I could read this letter that I got here at let me see. I'm pretty sure I took a photograph of it because I thought I was just blown away by the letter. And I'm going to really disappoint myself if I don't have, I know I took a picture of it. And I thought, who writes a letter like this? and sadly enough, it's not pulling up in my phone.
No, sure, Andy. So it's like a spoof letter. It's meant to be Andy's Finch application letter to work for Thump Thump, and
right.
it's my response.
It's your rejection letter.
It's my response to him.
Yeah, it's telling him to learn how to get over the lumpy bumpy surface finish. I loved it. I read it and I just thought it was classic. So, but you know, what's interesting is, you know, here's a kid that looks up to you because, again, his introduction to you is through the magazines, and then gets to see you and says, hey, I want this guy to take a look at my car. And, you know, obviously, you know, Andy was enamored with Dennis Hyde's pink Ghia, which is the same color as my notchback. It's painted by the same guy. And, you know, his whole dream is to build that same car. And then he finally gets it done, brings it over and has you take a look at it like, hey, check this out. Cause you know, you're into wild stuff and here's this pink Carmen Ghia. But I think it's great because, you know, there's something to be said about people of our generation, right? Like there's people that have a thick skin and can take a little bit of correcting or advice or whatever we want to call it, and then take it and say like, could I do better? Can I make it better? You know what I mean? And
yeah, he wasn't upset. He wasn't upset. So we went bowling after.
Right. He buried those feelings deep inside talking to Andy. I mean, sometimes he's got a little PTSD over it, but I think he's going to be okay. And so,
yeah.
So now you start making, go ahead.
An inspirational talk. That's what it was.
It's like a motivational speaker, right? The tough love, get it together type thing. So now you're doing the adapters, the hubs, the steering wheels, and you start making parts. Now you got a small workshop. How are you able to get these parts and you know, are you selling most of these parts at shows and stuff like that, or people just coming to see you?
Okay, before we do that, let's talk about going to France, because that was a key thing, I think, for me, because at the time there was a Super VW show in Jablin in France, which I think if you have a look on the map, is quite near where Euro Disney is now.
Right.
And I'm not sure how I heard about the show being on. I can't remember now. But it was hardly any people from the UK went to this show, and it was absolutely brilliant. It was by a lake, and it was lovely. I mean, I love going abroad anyway. So we took the red Targa, and I took my dad's car, which again we need to speak about. I took my dad's car out there, and strangely enough, my dad's car had Peugeot rims on it. In fact, we'd gone to France, they were blown away because I hadn't seen a bug with Peugeot rims on it,
nice.
Which are obviously and that was an amazing trip to Jablin, and I met Jackie Morel and Stefan Zanzi, who's a photographer.
Yeah.
He's now based in California.
Yeah.
And that was fantastic. So it was after that when we came back, so that was in the summer, we came back and things with Gary weren't great, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I don't want to slag him off because, you know, I love the guy to bits, but you have to be honest. He was making more mistakes than he should have been.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to the point when he was painting, he was missing a lot of stuff. So I was having to have a mask on and stand in the booth, the shack, whatever, with him while he was painting because he was missing stuff, and loads of things were going wrong, and it was taking time and money to put right. He drove into the back of the Billabug coming out of a show in his dad's truck. He smashed all the back up, and it just got to the point where we had to part ways.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to stay in the same workshop anymore because it was terrible. It used to flood when it rained. The door fell off once, and the landlord come down and he straightened the hinges were held on with nails. He straightened the nails out and banged them back in with a hammer.
Got it done.
It was not a nice workshop, and so I moved only less than a mile up the other end of a particular road near us. Moved into a much larger workshop. But I was then on my own. And so I really, really had to get myself together with the manufacturer of the parts. And it was then that I really, after Gary went, that I really started to get into the manufacturing of parts. It was slow until Gary went, really. So the steering wheels and all that was long after Gary had parted company.
And then what made you decide what products to build?
So the inspiration for doing the steering wheel was the second to last Targa, a car called Lemon Bavois.
Where's the name Lemon Bavois come from? What is this? I don't understand this.
I wanted quite a pale colour. I was doing lots of rear lettering scripts, where you carve the letters under. We got known for doing that. Yeah, that was all And that was all. That wasn't done with a laser. That was drawn out, cut with an air saw and files. I mean,
Yeah.
it really very, very time consuming, and where like the center of an E or an A, which is inherently weak, could stop silly people, shall we say, pushing them, and show that they had to be reinforced with rods from behind. So I wanted a very pale colour.
So that car you built for you, for like a shop car?
No. Okay. I'm getting lost here. The car was restored pretty much like a resto car for a girlfriend at the time. And another Darren, this is going to sound really funny. Yeah. Another Darren came down to see me and said he wanted to build a car. And he wanted us to do it. He'd seen all of the features. And Darren Pete, this is from Leeds, he said he wanted a car. And I don't know if he had a car at the time. I can't remember if he had a car at the time. But I've just finished this resto car for my girlfriend at the time. And it was more economic for him to buy that from me, because I knew all the heater channels were done. It had all the pans done. I did everything. So I knew it was right for conversion, should you want to do it, rather than getting another car, redoing all the heater channels, redoing all the pans. I knew, and it ran beautiful. It rode really nice. So I convinced him to buy my girlfriend's car, which he did. And that became the lemon bavois. And the colour of the car was a very pale lemony colour. And Darren, who had the red Targa, was a chef. So I said, can you think of any kind of dessert or something which is like very pale colour? And he didn't. Lemon bavois. So that's why it was named lemon bavois.
Nice. So now it all makes sense.
Yeah, I know it's a bit disjointed, and I do apologise to anyone listening.
And now,
so that was trick. I mean, that was a really trick car, I think.
Yeah,
myself.
That had the target.
Myself on the back, because I was getting good at it now.
Right. I mean, it kind of had a aero style bumpers. It had the lower rocker panel welded in. It had the target top. Would you say this car is like really the car that had everything that Thump Thump was doing, from the steering wheel to the target to the fitted bumpers, the lower rocker panel?
Yes.
Like that was the pinnacle of like what you guys were doing. Everything was done. This car checked every option.
Well, I thought when I did the red one that kind of was as good as I was going to get at the time.
Right.
I must. But Darren, I'll have to call them by their surnames, because so many Darrens involved in this story. It's just ridiculous.
Right.
Darren Jacobs. I had ideas for the interior. I didn't. The interior that ended up in the red Targa was nothing to do with me. It was a so fine interior. I absolutely hated it. I didn't want that. That was nothing to do with me, and that kind of it's spoilt for me as a creative person. It was like, that last bit. Let me do the interior. He couldn't afford it. He went for a so fine interior. Okay, fair enough.
Right.
With the lemon bavois, everything was done by me. Absolutely everything. The interior, the ruched leather, everything was me. So I suppose all of it, 100%, was my work in that car. So I suppose in a way that, I suppose that is my favourite one in a way. Billabug for the fun element, because that was just completely bonkers. But from an aesthetic point of view, as a complete package, I think the lemon bavois is my favourite, definitely.
Now the lemon bavois, is that car still exists today?
Yes. there's something very strange about my cars. People put them away and don't get them out again.
Really? So this car still exists and it's still in decent condition?
Well, so most people I've built cars for, I've been very lucky that they've become very good friends over 30 odd years, which is lovely. That is the absolute, that is the bonus out of all of this. I think is the friends I've made from working on cars, and I'm still friends with them 30 odd years later, and that's lovely. Even Spike, and his lumpy bum. We're really good friends.
The lumpy, bumpy surface of the moon.
So the car, it went to a couple of shows, and then I don't know why, he stopped driving it, and he kind of hid it in a room. He built a room around it. So Darren and Pete owned like a shop fitting, I don't know what you would call it in the US. It's a shop fitter. They go and design interiors for shops and fit them out with different paneling or whatever.
Right.
He owned a company. So in the workshop, which was massive, he built a room and put it in there. And there it's kind of sat until about 4 years ago. I was going past Leeds and I popped in to see it. If you got on a ladder, you could see it in this room. And I was like, why don't you get it back on the road? It seems such a shame. Just get it out. No one's driving it. By then he had a little girl. So I said, it'd be lovely to take her out in the car when she gets older. And so he did move it. He moved the car from the workshop to his house. He's got a lovely house with like an underground garage. And he did move it to the house and he cleaned it all. The paintwork was still really, really good on it. Nothing's moved. But he still hasn't commissioned it to get it back on the road.
Really?
And every now and again, I send him a message, what's happened about the car. And hopefully one day we might see it back on the road. But not at the moment.
And so what do you think the total number of cars were that you built during your time of Thump Thump?
Oh, not many. Not many at all. I mean, in the history of Volkswagen, the Thump Thump was a little blip. So...
But you've got the notchback you've got Darren's 67 Targa. I mean, I think once you kind of take a car and start putting your spin on it, you know what I mean? Like you did 8 Targas in total, right? Is that what you were saying? 8?
Yes, but I didn't do 8 complete cars.
Right.
I did 8 Targa conversions, and so there's 1, 2, 3, 4. I know where there's 5, I think. And then the other 3, I just did the Targa conversion. Then the people took it away to have it painted by whoever or do whatever. So, and they, as far as I know, they never come to light again. So where they are, I don't know.
Now, did you have a flat rate you charged through the Targa, or was it just a time and material thing?
So I lost a lot of money doing the first one, as you can imagine.
Right.
Because Darren Jacobs put a lot of faith in me, and I was learning doing his car. So I think that's fair dues. So it took me 5 weeks, and at the time I think I charged him £1,500, which for the amount of work,
that's every other week for free.
Oh yeah. But then I got much quicker doing them.
Right.
But working on cars, and the hourly rate thing has always been a bit of a bugbear with me, because as Thump Thump, I never made any money at all. I mean, I truly didn't, because if someone came to me and wanted pans, heater channels done, they wanted, a few mods here and there, and I thought that maybe the car would be spoilt if it didn't say have the dash done. I'd end up doing the dash for nothing, because it was more important to me that the car looked right, because it was going to have my name on it.
Right.
So if they couldn't afford it, I would just do it and not charge them.
And that's not really a smart
And
business
that's
practice.
That's not good business sense. No, that's rubbish. That's actually rubbish.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, but, I made some nice cars, but I didn't earn any money doing that, doing it at all.
And so what was the reason you decided to close Thump Thump? That you just weren't making any money and it was more work than it was, and it was making you not like the hobby?
Oh, okay. So do you have business rates in the States on work? Okay. So at the time, the mortgage rate was really high on the apartment that I bought. That was really high. Then I was paying rent, and the rates were more than the rent on the workshop I was in. I mean, so my outgoings before I even opened the door was colossal, and the stress of that was really not good. And in the last year of trading, my mum had a heart attack.
That's not good.
Yeah.
And when something like that happens, you start to take stock what value time actually has on this world.
Yeah, you have to give me a bit of a break there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my mum had a heart attack, and I split up with my partner at the time, and I developed arthritis in my hands, which I was only 34, so that's really not good. Really not good. And I'm finding it quite painful because when you're doing body work, you're holding like a rubbing block and a lot of pressure on your fingers.
Yeah.
And I was struggling with that. And I think everything kind of collapsed in 1 year, and I had to walk away from it. I think I fell out of love with the cars because it took up too much of my time, I think, and it destroyed a relationship. And I just didn't want to do it anymore. I wanted to do I've always been quite creative, and I wanted to do something else.
Yeah. And so from that point, do you just take a break from the VW scene as a whole? You just kind of disappear?
No, because part of what I did at the time, I was quite heavily involved in the running of the shows then.
Yeah.
So the show and shine, I was quite heavily involved in that, the bug jams, and so I didn't completely step away from it, but my interest in actually working on the cars had gone by then.
And then at that point, so I got a couple of questions, because you made the steering wheels, which those steering wheels, they couldn't have been cheap to make. And is there a total number of steering wheels you produced, or were they produced as they were needed, or did you have to buy a big inventory up front?
Now, I do apologise because I didn't answer one of your questions earlier correctly.
Yeah.
So the first steering wheel was designed for Lemon Bavwell, because I designed everything in the car. Let's do a steering wheel. So the first one was mild steel, laser cut. I had the ring made, and it was chrome. The first one was chromed, not stainless. But that was mad. I mean, anyone that saw the first wheel on the car had never seen anything like that. I mean, at the time, you could buy billet stuff from the States, but there was nothing quite like that. And I love steering wheels. I've always liked steering wheels. It's the thing you're holding that's in front of you all the time you're driving. So it's rather important. And so then I thought, oh, let's design some. So again, it's massively expensive. It really, really was so expensive because you had to have multiples of each design done to make it cost effective. Like I didn't make that many. I'd have to guess about 60 or 70.
And that wasn't
not that many.
It wasn't cheap to make those, I'll bet.
No.
And especially for a guy who's working hand to mouth like that, you know, where you're just kind of working to pay the bills almost.
It was a bit of a gamble. I borrowed money to do it. I had one guy local that made the outer rim. I had another person laser cut them, another person TIG weld them, another person polished them, another person machined the centers. So I think there was 8 different people involved in the manufacturing of them.
Wow.
Which is quite a bit, and obviously you're all having to pay for each stage.
Yeah. And what did the steering
wheel
It
was my design. It was my design, but I didn't have any hand in actually physically making them. They were all done by really good guys that were really, really good at what they did. And when I shut Thump Thump, I sold them to German car company.
Yeah.
And the ones they manufactured are awful because they cut corners. So people, when they kind of collect them now, which is lovely. I'd rather see them on cars rather than in boxes.
Right.
But when people collect them, they want my ones and not the German car company ones because there's such a vast difference between them.
So you said there's about 60 total made. Now, were all of them branded with a Thump Thump on there or no?
Yes, all my ones had the logo etched into it.
So those are fairly collector items. And what did it sell for back then in 1990? You know,
maybe £180, something like that. I have somewhere. I will dig out a price list for you.
I was gonna say that's pretty cheap. I mean, even for back then, because you figure no, because maybe a Grant steering wheel might have been $50. So you're 3 times the price of
they were quite. Again, it's very difficult to price because I was kind of pricing, but the idea. If I carried on, I would have sold them at trade prices to other outlets.
Right.
So the markup's got to be quite good to let you give a trade discount on them.
Right. So after you end up, and was that your best selling product that you made?
Was that my best selling product? The most money I earned was from hub drilling.
Oh, really?
By far.
Yeah.
That used to be. I remember it was £100 to have 4 drums or discs drilled, and the guy around the corner used to do them for £25. So I used to earn £75 for driving them a mile, and I earned more money doing that than anything else, I think.
Yeah, you made a killing. So
I should do loads of lowerings. I mean, loads and loads of lowerings, welding swaleways in, and I could do if things weren't really heavily seized.
Yeah.
You know, rear torsion bar to tube bolts that have been on there forever. If everything came undone, I could do a lowering in a day.
Yeah.
That wasn't bad money either, really.
Yeah, but good luck getting the car that nothing's seized up on in the UK, right? I mean, everything's rusted over there.
Yeah, and also when I used to do them, there used to be a VAG dealer quite close to me called Abridge Engineering, and they had all the alignment tools for the rear as well, factory tools, because they're VAG dealer.
Yeah.
So I used to run there and they used to align everything, and they used to ride so well because everything was set up by Volkswagen. It was it was really, really, they rode beautifully.
Nice. So after you end up closing the shop, you're involved in the show circuit for a little bit. Like, what shows were you involved in helping put on?
Bug Jam mainly.
Yeah.
And No Worries did Beetle Bash. I was good friends with the guys from No Worries.
Now, I remember No Worries. Are they still around or no?
No, they're long gone.
That's another old school company that, in the 90s, there seemed to be companies popping up out of everywhere, getting into the VW scene, and they'd run for 3-4 years and then just disappear, So we had the same thing.
Yeah, they were a clothing company, basically. No Worries, a clothing company.
Yeah.
Not my kind of bag at all, what they produced, but it was... people liked it, and they did really well, really quickly. With really good at marketing, advertising, really good. So they built up the business incredibly fast.
Yeah.
But I think they overshot themselves. They were signing quite big bands and DJs for their shows, and they did one show, and the ticket price was too expensive. And I think there was some major football event on, and so the ticket sales didn't cover the outlay, and they disappeared from sight basically.
Yeah.
in the middle of a show the next morning, the two guys that ran it had left the site, just gone. It was a bit of a shock.
And now, so
yeah.
you've stayed with your kind of with your finger in the pulse of the scene for quite a while. I mean, I know that I talked with Andy, and you were kind of helping him out for a little bit when he was getting going, and then now you've got something to do with trophies and stuff like that now.
Well, I've always, even so, I've always made trophies primarily for No Worries when they did shows. I've made so many, because there used to be so many categories. I think I must have made, for one show, I'd have to make 85 trophies. There's a category every year and every connotation of Volkswagen going. So there used to be masses of trophies, and I've always enjoyed making trophies. I love to give someone something that's going to sit in their house, and they won for a car. And I think at the time, most of the trophies here were they were disgusting, chromed plastic on a marble or wooden plinth. And the ones I won from the cars I had, I put in a skip because they were just awful, absolutely awful. So I never wanted to I wanted them to be quite unique to me, and that the people winning them would treasure them, really.
Yeah.
That's kind of continued until Volkswagen this year, when I made some concrete trophies. It was a little bit strange for some people. Well, I quite like doing them.
And now I saw you were at Volksworld this year in your bubblehead suit, which I thought was pretty awesome to see you out there with the big bubblehead gear. What do you think of the VW scene as you've seen it evolve? Because obviously the 90s, the whole theme in the 90s, I was talking with someone the other day, and I was explaining that the difference today is like clean, detailed, all that stuff. In the 90s, it was like futuristic, modern day. Like, how can you take this old Beetle and make it modern with the Targa, with power windows? Like all Future Shock that I own has power windows, digital dash. It's got indirect lighting everywhere in the interior. It's got the 2-spoke steering wheel. It's got all kinds of things like that. And that was kind of the scene there. Nowadays, everything is like hyper detail, super clean paint. I mean, metal finish, everything, really top end stuff like that. How do you view the cars of today, and what's a car over the last few years that really a standout to you?
Well, no. When I go to the shows now and I look at the stuff I used to produce, I think that my work was a bit of a joke in a way, because the finish of the cars now is just, it is incredible. The dedication of the people that do the work blows me away. It really, I love, the quality I love seeing the dedication and the quality, which is I never achieved. I'm not sure if the imagination's there. Maybe
have
parts are. I don't go to a show. How can I describe it without sounding rude?
Well, have you seen something?
The finish is amazing, but it's nothing. It's nothing. I go out and go, oh my god! But why? It's incredible that someone's used that panel on that car, or they flipped that round, or done this. It's not custom enough for me, but that's a personal taste. Some people hate custom stuff.
Absolutely, and based on that, have you seen anything over the past? When's the last time you walked into a VW show and something stopped you in your tracks?
A couple of years ago, there was a Fridolin, and I think it was white. I don't know what country it was from. A Fridolin with a mid-mounted V8 in it on a tube.
Yeah, the W12. I remember the car. Yeah.
Oh, it was a W. Yeah, I thought, oh, that looks fun. That really. Yeah, that for me, I thought, I'd like to take that home. That just the engineering alone was incrediit was bonkers, absolutely bonkers.
Well, and I'm going to definitely agree with you on the standpoint of course, maybe we're kind of the old dudes in the scene, but it seems like, the level of detail and finesse these cars get is way over the top. But I also really love the custom one-off uniqueness of people that just let their ideas go. And I mean, like, there couldn't be more of a statement of more like Billabug, right? Like you do that car and it's based off of this interior is going to be wild. And if you had to have a car, in my opinion, in the VW scene that screamed the 90s, I'd have to say Billabug was it, because from the outside looking at the car on the street, any kid with primer and some tint could make a car look the same on the outside.
Yeah, that's right.
No, but what I'm saying, and I don't mean that as a put down. What I'm saying is like the goal was attainable, and it wasn't $1 million build. It was creativity.
No. Well, the funny thing with Billabug, it used to get a lot of stick. Well, people used to call it filler bug.
Right.
Which is quite funny because people used to use a lot of filler. I mean, people use a lot of filler now, but now they call it shaping up.
Right.
They don't call it filler work anymore. But looking at your Razor, people in America still use lots of filler.
Well, yeah. Listen, it's the lazy man's metal work, is what it is. You know what I mean?
That's right.
Why pull the dent when you could just go through the skip trowel and just fill everything?
That's it. So the Billabug was never meant to be a car. It was never meant to be a car that would be around for years. It was basically a rolling advert for the clothing. Yeah. It had to be shocking and mad, and I think it did achieve that purpose. So I think it deteriorated quite rapidly.
Yeah.
But then there's a really lovely guy called Carl Mayer. Thank goodness he got hold of the car and he rebuilt it the right way. Really clever guy, really good at what he does. And he rebuilt Billabug, and he changed like the front screen. He changed to an oval one. He blended in the front headlight rims. He did his own, small touches. It was still Billabug, but small touches. And that's what appeared again on the front cover of Volk's World. And as far as I know, Billabug is the only car to appear on a front cover 3 times in different guises, basically.
Right. No, I think it's
The magazine, the anniversary one you showed me, I mean, it's on there, and I was blown away when that was on the front cover. After so many years, I thought it was really nice.
well, and what I think, the chop top I showed you, that car covered Hot VWs and then Trends twice, and it was built 1985. And one of the things about that car, it's like it's a simple car, but it was unique for the time and it stood out. And it's one of those things where it's like it does, because I tell people all the time, I have some cars that were expensive to build, and people say, "Oh, it must be nice to have money to build these nice cars." And then I point out several cars that didn't cost anything to build, but were so creative, so cutting edge, and people built them in their garages that it's like, it's not about money. It's about creativity. It's about following a theme through the car. Cause I love a car where someone's taken a theme and run it through the whole car,
Well, the biggest compliment I ever got, I think, from someone, I can't remember who it was, but he said to me, he said, if I'm not around and one of my cars turns up at a show, that they would know it's my car just from the way it looked.
Yeah.
Without knowing who it's been built by, but they would know that was a Thump Thump car. And I love that. It's the biggest compliment I've ever had, that they knew it was built by me just from the way it looked.
Yeah. Now, if you had an opportunity to build, let's say, a wish list, and you could build the ultimate Volkswagen, do you still have a desire to have a car built or to build a car if you were capable of building one at this time? And if so, what would it be?
Okay, that's a that's a bit of a sore point.
Yeah.
So I purchased quite a few years ago a gear hardtop coupe from San Diego. I didn't bring it in; someone brought it in. But the shell was incredible. It was in such good condition. The nose had never been crunched. It was brilliant, and I sat on it, and nothing happened with it. And then I become friends with Lloyd Jackson. I don't know if you know Lloyd Jackson from Deluxe.
I don't.
No. Okay. Well, I'd say Lloyd Jackson is one of the best metal workers in the country. I mean, what he's forgotten more than I will ever know. I mean, he's incredible, and he's a good friend of mine, and he was meant to do the gear for me, and we did start work on it, and for whatever reason it was there for 5 years and didn't get done. He had things going on and it didn't get done, and I decided, rather than, because I love Lloyd, and rather than lose his friendship, I decided to get rid of the car. And that the shell from that car, because I sold the pan and the body separately, and the shell of the car was right opposite me when I was doing the show this year.
When you were doing what?
When I was doing Volkswagen this year, the right opposite
really?
where we were doing our Mr. Bubblehead thing. My body of my car was right opposite where I was.
Oh wow, that's everything coming full circle.
Yeah. So I'm glad someone finished it. No, I love the fact that someone finished it.
Yeah.
But kind of that's the one that got away, and it would have been quite strange. Which is, I was going to do a Karma gear with 3 headlights, so the third headlight in the nose.
Like the Tucker, like the old Tucker.
Yeah. I love cars with 3 headlights. There's something about them. I've seen loads of specials with 3 headlights, so it would have been a Karma gear with 3 headlights, and I didn't get to do it, but things move on.
Listen, I'm glad that A, you're still around the scene, B, you're still being creative and a ball buster, like we say here in the States. You're still being a bit of a ball buster, which I enjoy, because when everyone's too serious, it just makes it annoying. Like everyone just takes themselves too seriously. And I think if everybody were to take a step back and just really understand the reason why we love the hobby is the people. It's less about the car, more about the people. The cars are just an extension of our personalities, and I think what's even greater is that is Billabug is really a match to your personality. You know what I mean? And the uniqueness of you as an individual. And I'm grateful for guys like you in the VW scene that would inspire guys like me and think like it just something cool, because I've always been a guy where I like something that's a little bit different. I don't like everything being the same, everything looking like everybody else's car. I like to have cars that would make a person that would never drive a Volkswagen want to drive that car. So, I mean,
yeah, it's funny because people don't like custom VWs. A lot of people, they like, it's got to be, you know, from the factory, etc. So they don't like custom stuff, but then they go crazy over something like a Ramesh, which is a custom, you know, it's made by a custom workshop,
right?
Or a Headmuller. They love that, but they don't like an individual guy making his own car unique. I don't understand the correlation between the two. You hide a Ramesh in such high esteem, which is a company building a one-off car, but there's someone making their own unique piece you think is bad. So that's always puzzled me slightly.
Well, I mean, if we look at it from this standpoint, Billabug, which was your creation in your mind from a phone call of doing something wild with interior to get attention at a show, when the 90s was all about getting attention, being loud, being boisterous, and to be on a podcast in 2024 for a car that you built in 1990, I think that says something, because it was,
that's mad.
You know what I mean? But it's such, it made a snapshot in history of what that time was all about. I mean, we're not going to get into the Wham jokes and stuff like that, because every time I see the car, I'm thinking the song Jitterbug. You know, that's what's going on in my head, and I think it's, you know, I love it. I love everything about it. If someone had to say what was the 90s about, I think a picture of that Billabug, the interior, it's just one of those things where it was like, yeah, it didn't have to make sense. It just had to be cool. And that's really the car hobby in a nutshell, right? It's the pursuit of cool. I think one day I'm going to write a book called The Pursuit of Cool, like just trying to be cool. And what is cool, right? Cool is so many different things to so many different people, and different generations have their own versions of cool. But it's just, this is one of those things that it just continues to go on. And that car, regardless of what people called it, said about it, or whatever it was, that car inspired so many people to be creative, to do their own thing, to...
Oh, hopefully, yeah.
You know, well, there's no doubt, because I mean, it's one of those things where, like, how many pages have we turned in a Volkswagen magazine? How many cars just we flipped by to where we see something like this and it'd stop you in your tracks, you know? So I think, you know, kudos to you for building it. I'm glad we got to catch up, because I always thought, like, when I saw the picture of the two of you guys in the jackets. Now, do you still have the jackets?
No, I sold the jackets with the car. I think Carl Mayer, the guy that rebuilt it, has still got one.
Yeah.
I think the guy that owns Billabug now may have the other one. And then I had some material left over, and I had like a Hawaiian style shirt made from it, which I do.
I love it.
I do wear now and again. And one of the guys that owned the car, I think it was the third owner, I wore it to his wedding.
That's awesome.
So to Chris Webb, who again is a really good friend of mine that owned Billabug, I wore a Billabong shirt to his wedding.
Man. Well, listen, you know, I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast and just sharing your story with us. I mean, it's definitely it hit answered a lot of questions that I had about things with respect to that. And, you know, just the fact that what I love with doing this podcast is not only just tracking down the history, because I was thinking about that earlier this week when I saw someone else in the Southern California VW scene came out with another way to pay homage to all the guys in California about their cars in California. And I just thought, like, the scene the Volkswagen scene is so much bigger than that. It's worldwide. There's so many people
Oh yeah.
that are connected by it. And I'm glad through this podcast that I'm able to track down people like you through friends of a friend and get you on the podcast to hear the story, because this car was cool. This is one of those cars that in my list of top 100 cars, it's going to go in there as something that was just legendary back in the time. So man, I appreciate you building it, because it's
very nice of you to say that.
It's one piece of all the cars that I've seen that gave me like, oh, well, there was always that guy that did this, and there was always something with that, so, and that's how this hobby is, man. It just, you build things to motivate people. You build things for a passion for yourself. And if it motivates other people to do stuff, the biggest compliment I ever get from people is they see my carbon cab, or they see something and go, man, ever since I saw that car, it inspired me to do this. And that's what, in my opinion, the hobby's all about, so.
Definitely.
Thanks a ton, man. Thanks for coming on. And if people want to get in touch with you, how do they get in touch with you?
Pigeon is quite good.
Pigeon or Facebook?
Oh yeah, Facebook. You could use that. Pigeon's more. I like Pigeon better.
Nice.
Try it.
Mike Tyson loved pigeons too. So, but
yeah, there is a Thump Thump Facebook page.
Yeah, and I'll put a link to that in the podcast description of that. And definitely, Jay. I look forward to meeting you. I'm gonna be in the UK toward the end of June. I'll be at Andy's place, hopefully picking up my Type 34. So we got
I'll definitely come down.
Big plans. Big plans for that, and I look forward to meeting you one day in person.
Excellent.
Yeah,
nice to speak to you.
Hey, great talking to you. Well, if you enjoyed that podcast, and I know if you're into VW history, you definitely did. There's a lot of content there and a lot of information. Some people think things go too long. I think, how can you cram 15 years into 2-hour podcast? But definitely good, definitely worth listening to. And for more information on Let's Talk Dubs One Crazy Weekend, go to letstalkdubs.com. And don't forget to support our sponsors. And until next week, guys, later.
You probably don't know that there's a new Volkswagen out that doesn't look like a Volkswagen.